The family meeting was held in Uncle Richard's oak-paneled study, the same room where he'd announced every major family decision for the past 20 years. 15 adults sat in leather chairs arranged in a semicircle, all summoned to discuss Grandpa William's estate planning. The will reading wasn't scheduled for months, but Richard wanted to clarify expectations about inheritance distribution. I sat in the back row, notepad in hand, watching my adoptive family discuss my financial future without particularly caring about my input. This wasn't unusual. In the 12 years since Mom and Dad had adopted me at age 16, family financial discussions had always carried an unspoken understanding that certain benefits were reserved for real family members. Grandpa William worked his entire life to build wealth for his bloodline, Uncle Richard announced from behind his massive mahogany desk. The wall behind him displayed framed photos of 3 generations of family businesses, construction companies, manufacturing plants, and real estate developments that had made the family name synonymous with success in our Ohio industrial town. The inheritance should reflect biological relationships, Richard continued. Blood relatives who carry the family name and the family genes. That's what Grandpa would have wanted. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Aunt Patricia nodded firmly. Cousin Michael leaned forward in approval. Even my adoptive parents, Mom and Dad, remained silent rather than challenge the family patriarch. Now, I'm not saying adoption isn't meaningful, Richard clarified, glancing in my direction. Jennifer has been a wonderful addition to our family. But financial inheritance is different. It's about passing wealth to the next generation of biological descendants. More nods. I wrote biological descendants only in my notepad and underlined it twice. The estate is valued at approximately $47 million, Richard announced. I propose dividing it equally among Grandpa's 6 biological grandchildren: Michael, David, Sarah, Rebecca, Thomas, and Catherine. That's roughly $7.8 million each. I did the math automatically. 6 biological grandchildren, $47 million. No provision for the one adoptive grandchild who'd been calling William Grandpa for over a decade. What about Jennifer? Dad asked quietly. His voice carried the careful tone of someone who wanted to advocate for their child without causing family conflict. Richard's expression softened with what appeared to be genuine compassion. Jennifer will always be family in every way that matters emotionally. But adopted kids don't get family money. That's just how inheritance works. Blood relatives only. The room was silent for a moment. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting to see how I'd react to being financially excluded from the family I'd been part of since high school. I completely understand, I said, closing my notepad. That makes perfect sense. Relief was visible on several faces. Richard smiled approvingly. I'm glad you're being so mature about this, Jennifer. It shows real character. Thank you, I replied. I appreciate you being direct about family financial priorities. The meeting continued for another hour, covering details about trust structures, tax implications, and timeline considerations. I listened politely, occasionally asking clarifying questions about procedures and legal requirements. My finance background made me useful for technical discussions, even if I wasn't benefiting from the decisions being made. After the meeting ended, several family members approached me with expressions of sympathy mixed with relief. You're handling this really well, Cousin Sarah said, squeezing my shoulder. I know it must be disappointing, but you understand why bloodlines matter for inheritance. Of course, I agreed. Family money should stay with family genes. Michael joined our conversation. Exactly. Plus, you've got your accounting career. You're not dependent on family wealth like some of us who went into the family businesses. I nodded thoughtfully. Michael managed one of the family's construction companies. His brother David ran the real estate division. Most of my biological cousins had built their careers within the family business ecosystem, supported by capital from previous generations. It's different when you're self-made, I said. I've never relied on family money for anything. That's what makes you so strong, Aunt Patricia added. You've built your own independent life. Independent. Self-made. Strong. The family had always used these words to describe my situation, and I'd never corrected their assumptions about what my independent life actually looked like. Tuesday morning, I sat in my downtown office reviewing the financial documents I'd brought home from Richard's meeting. Midwest Manufacturing Corporation was prominently mentioned throughout the estate planning materials. It was the crown jewel of Grandpa Williams' business empire, the company that had generated much of the family's wealth over the past 30 years. I opened my secure investment management platform and navigated to my portfolio overview. Total assets under management, $1.2 billion. Personal net worth, $580 million. The numbers represented 15 years of strategic investing, beginning with a modest inheritance from my biological grandmother and growing through carefully calculated risks in emerging markets. I located the Midwest Manufacturing holdings within my portfolio. The investment was structured through 4 different shell companies to maintain anonymity. Pinnacle Capital Holdings 22%, Strategic Growth Partners 18%, Industrial Innovation Fund 15%, and Legacy Investment Group 12%. Combined, these entities controlled 67% of Midwest Manufacturing Corporation. Uncle Richard had no idea that his company's largest shareholder was the adopted niece he'd just excluded from family financial benefits. I picked up my secure phone and called Harrison Wells, my investment manager at Blackstone Capital. Harrison, I need to liquidate the Midwest Manufacturing positions. All 4 shell companies, complete withdrawal. Jennifer, that's a substantial position. $180 million in invested capital, plus you're the controlling shareholder. Complete withdrawal will destabilize the company significantly. I understand the implications. May I ask what's driving this decision? Midwest Manufacturing has been one of our strongest performers. Revenue growth, expanding market share, solid management team. I looked out my office window at the city skyline. Several buildings in the downtown area had been constructed by family companies, their signs bearing the family name that I shared through adoption but apparently not through financial inheritance rights. The investment no longer aligns with my values, I said. I see. How do you want to structure the withdrawal? We could phase it over several quarters to minimize market disruption. No. I want immediate liquidation. Today. Harrison was quiet for a moment. Jennifer, immediate withdrawal of $180 million will create severe cash flow problems for Midwest Manufacturing. They'll likely need emergency financing within days, possibly bankruptcy protection within weeks. That's their responsibility to manage. It's also going to impact every employee at the company. Midwest Manufacturing employs over 400 people. I considered this information carefully. 400 jobs, many of them held by people who'd worked for the company for decades. People who'd contributed to the success that made my uncle wealthy enough to distribute $47 million to his biological grandchildren. Harrison, what percentage of Midwest Manufacturing's workforce would you estimate earns less than $50,000 annually? Probably 60 to 70%. It's a manufacturing company, lots of floor workers, equipment operators, administrative staff. And what percentage of the family members inheriting from Grandpa Williams' estate work directly in the family businesses? I'm not sure I understand the connection. Humor me. Harrison paused while he thought. Based on what you've told me about your family structure, probably most of them. Your cousins manage various divisions, your uncle oversees operations. They're all drawing salaries from companies that your investment portfolio has been supporting. So when I withdraw my funding, the people most likely to lose their jobs are the employees who weren't invited to family inheritance meetings, while the people who will receive $7.8 million each are the same people who could find alternative employment within the family business network. That's an interesting way to analyze it. Proceed with the withdrawal, I said. Complete liquidation effective immediately. The first phone call came at 2:47 p.m. Uncle Richard's name appeared on my phone screen, but I let it go to voicemail. Jennifer, I need to speak with you immediately. Something's happening at the company and I think there might be some kind of coordinated attack on our investors. Call me back as soon as you get this. The second call came at 3:23 p.m., this time from cousin Michael. Hey, not sure if you've heard, but Dad's company is having some kind of financial crisis. Major investors are pulling out and he's panicking. Since you work in finance, I thought maybe you could help us understand what's happening. Call me back. By 4:30 p.m., I had 12 missed calls from various family members and a text message from Mom. Richard is asking if you know anything about investment firms. He thinks someone is targeting the family businesses. Please call him back. At 5:15 p.m. Harrison called to update me on the withdrawal status. It's done, he said. All positions liquidated, funds transferred to your primary accounts. Midwest Manufacturing's stock price dropped 43% in the last 2 hours of trading. They're calling emergency board meetings and reaching out to alternative funding sources. Any immediate operational impacts? Their CFO announced they're suspending all expansion projects and implementing a hiring freeze. They'll probably announce layoffs within the week if they can't secure replacement funding. What about management compensation? That information isn't public, but typically executive salaries are protected longer than line worker positions during financial crises. I hung up and drove home to my modest apartment. I'd deliberately chosen to live below my means, maintaining the appearance of someone who worked a steady accounting job rather than someone who managed nearly $1 billion in assets. The deception had been useful for observing my family's true attitudes about adoption, biological relationships, and financial inclusion. Wednesday morning brought 17 missed calls overnight. I listened to the voicemails while drinking coffee in my kitchen. Richard's voice had progressed from confusion to panic to desperation. The final message, left at 2:33 a.m., was barely coherent. Jennifer, I don't know what we did to deserve this, but someone is destroying everything our family built. Please, if you have any connections in the finance world, we need help. We're going to lose everything. At 8:30 a.m. my doorbell rang. Through the peephole I could see Uncle Richard standing in my hallway. He looked like he'd aged 5 years overnight, disheveled hair, rumpled clothing, eyes red from stress and sleeplessness. I opened the door. Thank God you're here, he said, pushing past me into my apartment. I've been calling you for hours. I was sleeping, I said, closing the door. What's going on? Richard collapsed onto my couch, holding his head in his hands. Someone is destroying our company. Our major investors, all of them, pulled out yesterday. $180 million, gone. Just like that. I sat across from him in my second-hand armchair. That sounds terrible. It gets worse. Without that funding we can't make payroll next month. We can't fulfill our existing contracts. We can't maintain our equipment. The bank is already calling about loan guarantees. What do the other family members think is happening? Michael thinks it's a competitor trying to force a hostile takeover. David thinks it might be related to some regulatory investigation. Patricia thinks it's just bad luck, market forces. What do you think? Richard looked up at me with exhausted eyes. I think someone found out about our estate planning meeting and decided to punish us for it. I kept my expression neutral. Why would anyone care about your estate planning? Because someone doesn't like how we're handling the inheritance. Someone thinks adopted kids should get family money, and they're using financial warfare to make their point. That seems like a very elaborate way to express disagreement about inheritance law. Unless, Richard said slowly, the person disagreeing has the resources to do something about it. We sat in silence for several minutes. Richard continued, holding his head in his hands while I processed the implications of his statement. Richard, I said finally, what would you do if you discovered that the investments keeping your company afloat were coming from someone you'd excluded from family financial benefits? He looked up sharply. What kind of question is that? A hypothetical one. If you found out that an adopted family member had been anonymously supporting the family businesses for years, and then withdrew that support after being told that adopted kids don't get family money, how would you react? Richard's face went pale. Jennifer, why are you asking me this? I stood up and retrieved my laptop from my desk. I opened my investment portfolio dashboard and turned the screen toward Richard. Because I want to know if your position on biological inheritance extends to biological investment, I said. Richard stared at the screen for a long moment, his eyes scanning the numbers. Total portfolio value, $1.2 billion. Midwest Manufacturing Holdings, $0, liquidated. Transaction history showing yesterday's complete withdrawal. This says you had $180 million invested in my company, he whispered. Had. Past tense. You're the major investor. You're the one who pulled out. I'm the adopted family member who decided that if adopted kids don't get family money, then family businesses don't get adopted kids' money. Richard set my laptop aside and looked at me directly. Jennifer, I had no idea you had this kind of wealth. I know. If I had known, the inheritance discussion would have been completely different. Would it? Richard was quiet for a moment. Honestly, probably not. I still believe that biological inheritance should follow bloodlines. But I would have been more diplomatic about excluding you. More diplomatic. Not more inclusive, just more diplomatic. Well, yes. If I had known you controlled the funding that keeps our company operational, I would have approached the conversation differently. I nodded slowly. So your position isn't that adopted kids don't deserve family money. Your position is that adopted kids don't deserve family money unless they have enough independent wealth to threaten family businesses. Richard's face flushed. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? I meant that inheritance should be based on biological relationships, but business relationships are different. If you're an investor in our company, that's a separate matter from family inheritance. Except that I became an investor because I'm a family member. I supported Midwest manufacturing because I wanted my adoptive family to succeed. But you never told us about your investments. Because I wanted to see how you'd treat an adopted family member who you thought had nothing to offer you financially. Richard stood up and began pacing around my small living room. This is a very expensive way to make a point about inclusion. It's a very expensive lesson about respect. What do you want from me, Jennifer? An apology? A change to the inheritance structure? What would it take for you to reinvest in the company? I considered his question carefully. Richard was asking what price I would accept for restoring funding to a business that employed 400 people, including many who'd worked there for decades. I want you to understand why I withdrew my investment, I said. Because we excluded you from the inheritance. Because you excluded me while assuming I had nothing valuable to contribute to the family's financial future. Richard stopped pacing. I don't understand the distinction. Richard, you spent 15 years watching me work in finance, watching me make strategic decisions, watching me provide practical advice during family financial discussions. Did it ever occur to you that someone with my background might have investment capacity? Not to this extent, no. Did it occur to you that someone might be helping fund the family businesses anonymously? No. Did you consider that your adopted niece might have deliberately maintained a modest lifestyle to observe how the family treated people they perceived as financially dependent? Richard sat back down on my couch. No. None of that occurred to me. So when you announced that adopted kids don't get family money, you weren't just excluding me from inheritance. You were demonstrating that you'd never considered me capable of contributing to family wealth. I suppose that's true. Which means that your decision wasn't really about biological versus adopted relationships. It was about assuming that adopted family members are financial burdens rather than financial assets. Richard was quiet for a long time, processing what I'd said. Finally he spoke. What happens now? To the company, I mean. To the employees. That depends on what you've learned from this experience. I've learned that making assumptions about people's financial capacity can have serious consequences. What else? I've learned that adopted family members might have resources and capabilities that biological family members don't recognize. And Richard thought for another moment. I've learned that treating family members as lesser because of their adoption status is not only morally wrong, but potentially financially catastrophic. I opened my laptop again and pulled up a new document. I'm willing to consider reinvestment in Midwest manufacturing under new terms. What kind of terms? First, I want equal representation in family financial discussions. If you're making decisions that affect family businesses, I want input as a major stakeholder. Agreed. Second, I want the inheritance structure revised to include adopted family members. Not necessarily equal distribution, but meaningful inclusion. Richard hesitated. The other family members might object to changing Grandpa Williams' intended inheritance plan. Then you can explain to them that Grandpa Williams' intended inheritance plan was built on wealth generated by companies that I've been funding for years. Point taken. What else? Third, I want transparency. No more assumptions about who has money and who doesn't. No more exclusions based on perceived financial status. Understood. I typed up a preliminary agreement and showed it to Richard. $150 million in reinvestment, structured as a formal partnership rather than anonymous funding. You keep operational control, I get board representation and quarterly financial reviews. Richard read through the terms carefully. This is actually better than our previous funding structure. More capital, clearer governance, better oversight. It's what happens when you treat family members as partners rather than burdens. Richard signed the agreement, then looked up at me. Jennifer, I owe you an apology. Not just for yesterday's meeting, but for 15 years of treating you like someone who needed family support rather than someone who was providing it. Apology accepted. And I need to call an emergency family meeting to discuss revising the inheritance structure. That would be appropriate. Richard gathered his papers and headed toward my door. At the threshold, he turned back. One more question. When you said you completely understand our position on biological inheritance, did you mean that, or were you already planning this withdrawal? I smiled. I meant that I completely understood your position. I just didn't agree with it. Over the next month, I watched the family dynamics shift as everyone processed the new reality. The inheritance structure was revised to include a substantial provision for adopted family members. Family business discussions began including input from previously overlooked relatives. Most importantly, the assumption that adoption status correlated with financial dependence was permanently corrected. Midwest manufacturing recovered stronger than before, with better capitalization and more diverse leadership. The 400 employees kept their jobs, and several new positions were created as the company expanded into markets I'd identified through my investment research. But the most significant change was in how the family discussed success and contribution. The narrative shifted from biological inheritance rights to inclusive prosperity, from protecting family wealth to growing family wealth through everyone's capabilities. 6 months later, at Grandpa William's actual will reading, Richard stood up before the final distribution. Before we conclude, he said, I want to acknowledge that this family's financial success has been built not just on biological inheritance, but on the contributions of every family member, including those who joined us through adoption. Our strength comes from recognizing everyone's value, not from excluding people based on how they became part of our family. The revised inheritance distributed $47 million among 8 family members rather than 6, with adopted grandchildren receiving equal shares as biological ones. But more importantly, it established a precedent that family money belongs to family members regardless of genetics. Blood might be thicker than water, but shared values and mutual respect are thicker than blood.
Where are the papers? Show us the marriage certificate. Amanda's voice sliced through the warmth of our Christmas dinner, shattering the cheerful atmosphere. She stood at the head of the table, manicured nails digging into the polished mahogany surface, her eyes glinting with triumph. I bet you can't, because they don't exist. The room fell into a stunned silence. I set my fork down carefully, dabbing my napkin against my lips as 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Beside me, my husband, Michael, stiffened, his face paling. Across the table, my mother-in-law, Margaret, wore that thin, knowing smile, the one I come to despise over the last 5 years. Amanda, that's enough, Michael began, but she waved him off. No, Michael, we've all had enough. 5 years of watching her pretend to be part of this family. 5 years of lies. Show us the proof, Diana. Prove you're really married to my brother. I met her gaze steadily, then let my eyes sweep the room. Some of the family members looked horrified. Others, like Margaret, barely concealed their anticipation. I knew this moment had been orchestrated, the perfect scene set to humiliate me in front of everyone. Well? Amanda pressed, arms folded. We're waiting. I exhaled softly, then reached for my phone, my movements deliberate. The silence deepened as I scrolled through my contacts and tapped a number. Amanda's smirk faltered as I placed the call on speaker. Diana, came the smooth, familiar voice of James Peterson. I wasn't expecting a call from you on Christmas Day. I'm sorry to interrupt your holiday, James, I said, my voice even. But we have an interesting situation here. My sister-in-law seems to believe that my marriage to Michael doesn't legally exist. A beat of silence. Then a low chuckle. Ah, so they finally made their move. Margaret's smile stiffened. Amanda's smugness evaporated. Who is that? Amanda snapped. James Peterson, he replied, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. Lead partner at Peterson and Associates. Diana's personal attorney for the last 6 years. And I must say, this is quite the development, though not entirely unexpected. Michael turned to me, his brow furrowed. I kept my focus on Amanda. James, would you mind confirming something for my sister-in-law? I asked. She insists there's no legal record of my marriage to Michael. Certainly. The rustling of papers carried through the speaker. Marriage certificate filed and registered June 15th, 5 years ago. Joint accounts, property agreements, all documented and legally binding. Would you like me to email copies to the family? Amanda had gone ghostly pale. Across the table, Margaret gripped her water glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. That's impossible, Amanda sputtered. We checked the records. There was nothing. Yes, James mused. Your little courthouse search last month. Interesting timing. We were, of course, notified. And you see, when there are concerns about tampering, we take precautions. Understanding dawned in Michael's eyes. He now realized why I'd insisted on handling our legal matters myself, why I'd been so meticulous. Margaret's voice, usually so controlled, wavered. Diana, what is the meaning of this? I met her gaze and smiled, the same cold, polite smile she had given me for years. It's quite simple, Margaret. I've known all along that you and Amanda were trying to erase my marriage. The misplaced documents, the rumors, the little suggestions to Michael about keeping assets separate just in case. I reached into my bag and placed a sealed envelope on the table. I documented everything, every attempt, every inquiry, every conveniently lost file. And now that you've finally shown your hand, I nudged the envelope toward her. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about respect and boundaries. Silence. Amanda stood frozen, her confidence shattered. Margaret eyed the envelope as if it were a snake poised to strike. Michael slid his hand into mine under the table, his grip firm, reassuring. James spoke again, his voice light but edged with something unmistakable. Oh, and before I go, I've prepared a complete file detailing every instance of interference with Diana and Michael's marriage records. Should anything unfortunate happen to any legal documents in the future, well, let's just say it would raise some very interesting legal questions. I ended the call with a polite, "Merry Christmas, James," before turning back to my stunned audience. Now, I said, picking up my fork, shall we continue with dinner? I believe dessert is about to be served. The days after Christmas dinner passed in an eerie quiet. No calls from Margaret. No passive-aggressive texts from Amanda. The family group chat, normally a steady stream of messages, photos, and updates, had gone silent. Even Michael seemed distant, lost in thought as he processed everything that had come to light. It wasn't until 3 nights later, as we sat together in the living room, that he finally voiced the question I'd been expecting. How long have you known? His voice was quiet, almost hesitant, about what they were trying to do. I closed my book, setting it aside before turning to face him. Do you remember, 3 months after our wedding, when the courthouse called to verify our marriage license because the original had gone missing? He frowned, nodding slowly. Yeah, they said it was misfiled, right? No, I held his gaze. Margaret convinced a clerk to help her check our records. The original disappeared during that check. If I hadn't already filed copies with James, it would have been gone for good. Michael exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair, a telltale sign of his distress. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? I asked gently. Every time I tried to bring up your mother's behavior, you told me I was overreacting, that she just needed time to adjust. He flinched, guilt flickering across his face. I should have listened. I never thought they'd go that far. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A message from Amanda. We need to talk. Alone. I showed Michael the screen. His jaw tightened, but I placed a hand over his, reassuring. It's time to clear the air. All of it. The next afternoon, I met Amanda at a small cafe downtown. She looked different, less polished, almost fragile without her usual armor of designer clothes and meticulously styled hair. She sat clutching her coffee cup like a lifeline, her nails tapping restlessly against the ceramic. How did you know? She asked the moment I sat down. How long have you been collecting evidence? I stirred my tea, my movements slow, measured. Since before the wedding. The first time I overheard you and Margaret discussing how to protect the family assets from me, I knew I needed to be careful. You were spying on us? Her voice had an edge, but it lacked the bite it once held. No, Amanda. I was protecting myself. There's a difference. I met her gaze. The real question is, why? Why spend 5 years trying to invalidate my marriage? She looked away, shoulders sagging. Mom was convinced you were after Michael's inheritance. She said we needed a backup plan, a way to prove the marriage wasn't legal if you ever tried to take what wasn't yours. And you never questioned her? Never considered how this would affect your brother? Her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. She said she was protecting him. A shaky breath. But yesterday, I found something in her study. She pulled a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Bank statements, letters, legal notices, and then the truth. She's been embezzling from the family trust, Amanda whispered. The money she accused you of chasing. She's been stealing it herself. She needed someone to blame if it was ever discovered. A cold, sharp silence stretched between us as the final pieces fell into place. Margaret's iron grip on the family's finances, her relentless obsession with painting me as a gold digger, the desperate attempts to erase my marriage. It was never about protecting Michael, it was about protecting herself. Does Michael know? I asked. Amanda shook her head. I came to you first. I owe you that much. I studied her face, searching for deception. Instead, I found something unexpected, regret. Thank you for showing me this, I said finally, but you understand this can't stay buried. I know, she murmured. That's why I brought it to you. Mom, she has to be stopped. And I need to make things right. By the time I got home, my mind was racing. Margaret hadn't just tried to destroy my marriage. She had spent years stealing from her own children while setting me up as the perfect scapegoat. Michael was in his office, lost in paperwork. He looked up as I entered, eyes flicking to the folder in my hands. There's something you need to see, I said softly, and it's not going to be easy. For the next hour, we pored over the documents together. I held his hand as the betrayal unfolded before him, watching as anger, hurt, and disbelief flickered across his face. All this time, he whispered hoarsely. All this time she was accusing you of being after our money. She was the one stealing it. I squeezed his fingers, grounding him. I'm so sorry, Michael. He looked up at me, his blue eyes rimmed with red. No, I'm the one who's sorry. I should have defended you. I should have seen what they were doing. Instead, I let them push you to the outside while my own mother. His voice broke. I cupped his face in my hands, forcing him to meet my gaze. We'll handle this. Together. For the first time in days, he gave me a small, fragile smile. Together, he echoed, gripping my hand like it was the only thing keeping him afloat. As we sat there, surrounded by the remnants of Margaret's deception, I realized this wasn't the victory I had once imagined. It wasn't about proving I was right or about exposing their schemes. This was something deeper, more painful. But perhaps for the first time in years, it was real. The family meeting was set for Saturday morning at our house. Michael insisted on neutral ground, somewhere outside Margaret's domain, where her manipulations held no power. Amanda arrived first, clutching a fresh stack of documents she'd uncovered. Her face was pale, her fingers trembling slightly as she set the papers on the coffee table. We exchanged a brief glance, unspoken understanding passing between us. Today would change everything. Margaret arrived last. She hesitated for the briefest moment on the threshold, her usual confident stride faltering as she took in the sight of all of us waiting. Her mask slipped back into place just as quickly. What's this about? She demanded, her voice sharp with forced authority. Some sort of intervention. Michael stood, his grip tightening on the folder in his hands. He looked pale, but his voice was steady. Sit down, Mom. We need to talk about the family trust. The color drained from Margaret's face. She opened her mouth, no doubt ready with some excuse. But then Michael laid out the evidence. Bank statements, transfer records, forged signatures, a paper trail of betrayal stretching back years. Margaret tried to interrupt, her voice tight with indignation, but Amanda cut through her protests with a quiet, devastating certainty. We found everything, Mom. The offshore accounts, the gambling debts, all of it. You don't understand, Margaret protested, her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. I was protecting our family's legacy. Michael's voice broke. By stealing from us. By trying to destroy my marriage to cover your tracks. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. I watched as the truth unraveled Margaret's world. Her schemes, her manipulations, all the careful planning, exposed in the harsh, unforgiving light of day. Michael took a breath, steadying himself before delivering the final blow. We've already spoken with the family lawyer. The trust will be restructured. You'll no longer have access to any accounts. Margaret surged to her feet, her voice rising with desperation. You can't do this to me. I'm your mother. For the first time, I spoke. Yes, I said quietly, you are. Which makes this betrayal even worse. Her eyes darted between us, searching for an ally. But there was no one left to save her. And in that moment, I felt no satisfaction, only sadness. For the years of damage, the relationship she had poisoned, the love she had squandered in pursuit of control. The weeks that followed brought irreversible change. Margaret faced legal consequences, though Michael and Amanda insisted on handling the matter privately to avoid public scandal. The trust was completely restructured, placed under transparent oversight with an equal distribution among the siblings. Amanda, for her part, threw herself into making amends, not just with me, but with everyone her mother had driven her to hurt. One evening, over coffee, she hesitated before speaking, her voice unsteady. I was a terrible sister to you, she admitted, her fingers twisting around her mug. I let Mom poison everything. I never once thought for myself. I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. We can't change the past, Amanda. But we can decide what comes next. She blinked back tears, nodding. Michael focused on rebuilding, both within himself and within the family company. He implemented new financial controls, ensuring no one could ever manipulate the trust again. One night, as we sat on our back porch, he stared out at the darkened sky, deep in thought. You know what's ironic? He murmured. Mom always claimed you were a threat to our family's stability, but you're the one who saved us from her destruction. I leaned my head against his shoulder, watching the stars. Sometimes the people who seem to threaten our world are actually the ones helping us see it more clearly. 6 months after that fateful Christmas dinner, we hosted another family gathering. The energy in the house was different this time, lighter, more genuine. Amanda arrived with her new boyfriend, who looked at her with an affection that made me smile. Michael's younger cousins played in the yard, their laughter drifting through the open windows. As I set the table, carefully placing the same china we had used that Christmas night, I reflected on how much had changed. The marriage certificate Margaret had fought so hard to erase still sat safely in our files. But it no longer felt like a shield I had to wield in defense. Now it was simply what it was always meant to be, a symbol of our commitment. Michael came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. What are you thinking about? I turned to face him, smiling softly. How sometimes the worst moments lead to the best changes. He nodded, pulling me closer. We're stronger now, aren't we? Yes, I said. Because we chose to be. Looking around at our rebuilt family, I realized something. Victory doesn't always mean winning a battle. Sometimes it means healing the wounds that caused it in the first place. And sometimes the best revenge isn't vengeance at all. It's letting the truth shine so brightly that no one can ever hide in the shadows again. He's working late again. Dear Margaret, my mother-in-law said sweetly over the phone. You know how demanding his clients are. I looked at the security camera feed on my laptop. My husband, David's car, was parked outside a fancy apartment building across town. Of course, Margaret. Thanks for telling me. My name is Olivia. I'm 34, and I'm watching my 10-year marriage fall apart, piece by piece. The worst part isn't just that David is cheating, it's that his whole family, especially his mother, is helping him lie about it. You should try to understand, Margaret went on, her voice full of fake sympathy. Running a law firm is stressful. Sometimes he needs relief. I muted the call and laughed bitterly. Relief. Was that what they were calling his 26-year-old paralegal now? I unmuted. You're right, Margaret. I'm sure David is very stressed. On the screen, I saw the young woman get into his car. Right on time. That's the spirit, dear. Just be patient. He always comes home, doesn't he? Yes, he did. Smelling like expensive perfume we couldn't afford on just his salary. I glanced at my second screen, spreadsheets of every suspicious transaction, every late-night meeting, every lie. I appreciate your concern, Margaret, but I have to go. Work is calling. I hung up before she could reply. My eyes stayed on the screen as David's car drove away. 3 months ago, I would have cried. 3 months ago, I still believed his excuses. But that was before I found a marriage registration form for Thailand in his briefcase. Before I learned he planned to marry his mistress without divorcing me or splitting our assets. My phone buzzed. A message from my private investigator. Meeting confirmed, full proof collected. I smiled. David had no idea about the hidden camera in his office. The one that caught him telling his mistress just yesterday. Once we're married in Thailand, Olivia won't know anything. The house, the firm's assets, they'll all stay mine. My laptop dinged, an email from our accountant confirming the shady transactions I had flagged. David thought he was being sneaky, moving money into a secret account. He didn't realize I had been tracking every dollar for months. That evening, Margaret called again, her voice smug. David just called me. He's closing a huge case tonight. Isn't it wonderful how hard he works? I pulled up a hotel receipt on my screen, a luxury suite booked under his company card. Yes, Margaret. Really wonderful. You know, Olivia, she hesitated, pretending to care. If you put more effort into your looks, maybe you wouldn't work such long hours. I thought about my designer clothes, my daily gym sessions, my successful career. None of it mattered to Margaret. To her, I would never be good enough for her son. Maybe you're right, I said, keeping my voice steady. I should probably focus more on myself. She didn't catch the hidden meaning in my words. She never did. Later that night, I got a text from David's sister, Emma. Hey Liv, we need to talk. It's about David. I called her immediately. Emma was different from the rest of the family, less willing to lie. I can't stay quiet anymore, she blurted out. David's planning something awful. He and Mom, they're hiding money. He's marrying that girl in Thailand next month. Since there's no legal divorce or asset split, they think you'll get nothing. I leaned back, sipping my coffee. I know, Emma. You know, she sounded shocked. I've known for months. I'm gathering proof. Will you make a statement about what you've seen? Silence. Then, yes. What they're doing is wrong, Liv. I'll help. After the call, I sat in the dark, thinking about all the lies David and his family had told. They thought they were smart. They had no idea I was ahead of them. My phone buzzed again. Margaret, probably with another excuse. I ignored it. Soon, they'd all realized just how badly they had underestimated me. The front door opened. David walked in, trying to be quiet. I cleared my screens and put on my usual act. Working late again. I called out. He stopped in the doorway, loosening his tie, flashing a guilty smile. Big case. You know how it is. I smiled back. Of course. Your mother called to tell me. His shoulders relaxed. Good old Margaret, always covering for him. If only they knew what was coming. Everything changed 3 weeks later, when Margaret made her first mistake. I was reviewing security footage in my office when she called, her voice unusually agitated. Olivia, dear, I need you to sign some papers for the firm. Just some routine documents. I can bring them by today. I smiled, knowing exactly what those routine documents were. My PI had already obtained copies, transfer of ownership forms that would remove my name from our joint properties. All part of David's careful plan to leave me with nothing. Of course, Margaret. I'm working from home today. Stop by any time. She arrived an hour later, clutching a manila envelope and wearing her fakest smile. I'd set up a hidden camera in the living room, ready to capture everything. These just need your signature, she said, spreading the papers on the coffee table. David mentioned you've been so busy lately, he didn't want to bother you with paperwork. I picked up the first document, pretending to read it carefully. How thoughtful of him. And you bringing these by yourself. Well, you know how it is. Family helping family. She patted my hand condescendingly. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Before I sign, Margaret, could you explain exactly what these documents are for? She shifted uncomfortably. Just routine property transfers, dear. Nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about? I met her eyes steadily. Like David's upcoming trip to Thailand? Nothing to worry about there either. The color drained from her face. I don't know what you're talking about. I pulled out my laptop and turned it toward her. On the screen was a video of David and his mistress in his office, discussing their marriage plans. Margaret's hands began to shake. How did you? I know everything, Margaret. The affair of the hidden assets, the plans for a secret marriage. I have proof of all of it. I started playing another video, this one of Margaret herself, helping David move money between accounts. You've been spying on us? Her voice rose with indignation. No, Margaret. I've been protecting myself. Did you really think I was that stupid? That naive? She stood up abruptly, gathering the papers. You'll regret this. David will never forgive you for going behind his back. I laughed, actually laughed. Like he went behind mine? Like you helped him do it? Does Emma know about all of this too? At the mention of Emma, Margaret froze. Leave your sister-in-law out of this. Too late. She came to me weeks ago, told me everything. She's willing to testify about what you and David planned. Margaret sank back onto the couch, her carefully maintained facade crumbling. He's my son. I was protecting him. No, you were helping him commit fraud. Would you like to see the evidence I've gathered? The bank records? The hotel receipts? The property transfer documents you tried to hide? Tears began to form in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. This woman had spent years undermining me, helping her son deceive me, all while pretending to be a caring mother-in-law. What do you want? She whispered. I want you to call David. Right now. Tell him to come home immediately. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. I listened as she made the call, her voice breaking as she told him it was an emergency. Within 20 minutes, I heard his car in the driveway. David burst through the door, then stopped short at the scene before him. His mother in tears, me calmly sitting with a laptop full of evidence. What's going on? He demanded. Show him, Margaret said quietly. I turned the laptop toward him and started playing the videos. One after another, irrefutable proof of his deception. His face went from anger to shock to fear. How long have you known? He finally asked. Long enough to document everything. The affair, the fraud, the plans for Thailand. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out? He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing. Now it just seemed pathetic. Olivia, we can talk about this. No, David, we can't. But your lawyer can talk to mine. I handed him a business card. Everything goes through them now. You'll ruin him, Margaret protested weakly. No, Margaret. You and David did that yourselves. I just gathered the evidence. David started pacing, his legal mind probably racing through scenarios. The firm will survive, but not with you at the helm. The partners might be interested in knowing how you've been mishandling client funds to finance your affair. His face went pale. You wouldn't. Try me. I stood up, gathering my laptop. I've arranged for a hotel room. You can stay here tonight, pack your things. But tomorrow, I want you gone. Margaret stood too, her earlier confidence replaced by defeat. All this time we thought. You thought I was weak, naive, easy to manipulate. I smiled. That was your first mistake. The aftermath unfolded exactly as I planned. 2 days after the confrontation, Margaret called me in tears. David's mistress left him, she sobbed. She said she didn't sign up for all this drama. How could you do this to him? I sat in my office, reviewing the latest documents from my lawyer. I didn't do anything to him, Margaret. He did this to himself. You helped. He's staying with me now, she continued. He's devastated. The partners are reviewing his position at the firm. Because of the evidence I sent them about his misuse of client funds, I kept my voice calm. That was his choice, too. She was quiet for a moment. I never thought it would end like this. No, you thought it would end with me penniless and alone while your son started a new life. How's that working out? The line went dead. Emma came to see me the next day, bringing coffee and a hesitant smile. The family's in chaos, she said, settling onto my couch. Mom's beside herself. David's career is imploding, and his mistress is apparently already dating someone else. And how are you? I asked, genuinely curious. She'd taken a big risk coming forward. Relieved, actually. She sipped her coffee. I've spent years watching them manipulate people, always getting away with it. It was exhausting. I nodded, understanding completely. Thank you, Emma. Your statement to the lawyers made a difference. I just told the truth. Finally, she paused. Mom's not speaking to me now. Give her time. She's learning actions have consequences. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. David, facing potential disbarment and criminal charges for financial misconduct, agreed to my terms without argument. The prenup he tried to circumvent with his Thailand scheme now worked against him. I got the house, half the firm's value, and a clear conscience. His mistress, the young paralegal, found a new job at a different firm. Last I heard, she was dating one of the partners there. David's careful plans had crumbled so completely, it was almost sad. Almost. Margaret tried to salvage things one last time, showing up at my door unannounced. "We're still family," she pleaded. "Can't we just forget all this unpleasantness?" I looked at the woman who had enabled her son's worst behaviors, who had helped him try to destroy me, who had spent years undermining my marriage while pretending to support it. "No, Margaret, we're not family. We never really were. You made sure of that." "I was protecting my son. You were protecting his lies. There's a difference." I started to close the door, then paused. You know what the saddest part is? If you'd raised him to be honest, to face consequences, he might not be in this situation now. 6 months later, I sat in my newly redecorated living room with Emma, sharing a bottle of wine and catching up. David had taken a job at a small firm in another state, his reputation in tatters. Margaret had thrown herself into church activities, telling anyone who would listen about her ungrateful former daughter-in-law who had destroyed her family. "Mom still doesn't get it," Emma said, shaking her head. "She actually asked me yesterday if I thought you'd consider dropping the charges if David apologized." I couldn't help but laugh. Some people never learn. But some do. Emma raised her glass. "To new beginnings. And to facing consequences," I added, clinking my glass against hers. My phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. "David's met someone new. A nice girl who understands family loyalty. I hope you're happy with what you've done." I showed it to Emma, who rolled her eyes. "Want to tell her about the background check you ran on the nice girl who's actually married?" "No," I smiled, deleting the message. "Let them figure it out themselves this time." Looking around my peaceful home, I felt nothing but relief. The evidence I'd gathered was safely stored away, a reminder that I wasn't the naive wife they thought I was. The firm was thriving under new leadership, my career was soaring, and I had kept the one worthwhile relationship from my marriage, my friendship with Emma. "You know," Emma said thoughtfully, "you taught me something important through all this. Standing up for yourself doesn't make you the bad guy. Sometimes it makes you the hero of your own story." I thought about the months of careful planning, the evidence gathering, the quiet strength it took to wait for the right moment. I thought about Margaret's tears, David's shocked face, and the collapse of their carefully constructed lies. Not the hero, I corrected her. Just someone who finally stopped accepting the role of victim. The sun was setting outside, casting a warm glow through windows that were finally truly mine. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting free.